Rob, just let me know when I should be seeing it on YouTube.
Yeah, we're going live right now.
Oh, okay. Do, 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 do.
Oops. Let me
We
try
have
this again.
3,000 subscribers.
It went private, so I'm going to just give this.
I'm just going to run away and grab a copy of Chris's book. I'll be right back.
Hey folks, how's it going? It's Rob Avis here. I'm here with Chris Magwood and EJ Hurst from New Society Publishers. And we're going to be going through Chris's latest book today. So if you're just signing in and you've been on this channel before, you know the routine. Let us know what your name is, where you're calling in from. And today's topic is about something that's pretty close to my heart. I feel pretty passionately about the design of sustainable buildings. There was a quote that I put in our most recent email to our list, which was from Winston Churchill, basically saying, basically something along the lines of initially when we design our buildings, and then forevermore our buildings shape us. Or I think it's actually we shape our buildings and then forevermore our buildings shape us. And so today is about the design of sustainable homes, which represents a really big part of sustainable human habitat. So if you're just signing in, guys, let us know where you're coming in from and your name, as well as, you know, I always like to know one thing that you guys want to get out of today's call. So we're going to get started here in a couple of minutes. We're just getting things tuned up on our end here, and then we're going to be getting into the interview with Chris Magwood from Peterborough, Ontario. While we're waiting to get started here, if you've never been to the Endeavour Center up in Peterborough, Ontario, I highly recommend it. I taught up there a couple of years ago, and actually I think it was last year, Chris?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, wow, it's funny how time goes by. Yeah, really incredible center and lots of neat activities going on there. You can check them out on the web as well. All right, folks, well, we're going to get started here. So let's take your seats, grab a cup of coffee or a glass of water. And as we're going through today's presentation, we love to see comments on the chat window. So put your questions, your comments, speak to your fellow attendees as well. Ask them questions, ask us questions. Anything goes. We just ask that you keep your comments polite, and then everything's good to go. So welcome to Ideas on the Verge. So this is a collaboration between New Society and Verge Permaculture. Last year, Michelle and I wrote a book on rainwater harvesting, and it was super fun. Not only because we love the topic, but we actually had a really great time working with New Society Publishers. They're an incredible publishing house, and they've really got it dialed in. And one of the reasons we chose New Society, actually New Society chose us, but we've had New Society on our radar for a long time because they've got such incredible books on such a huge range of topics. Anyways, we enjoyed it so much that we decided to brainstorm with them on ways that we could potentially collaborate further with them. And out of that brainstorming came this concept of Ideas on the Verge, which is ostensibly a twice monthly book club. And so basically I will get a couple of books a month from New Society. I read them, I write down my questions, and then we organize an interview with that author to get deeper into their philosophy, their thinking, their ideas, their insights around their particular topic. And we're going to be interviewing for the next 12 months on topics, anything from collapse to raising meat rabbits, solar dehydration, you name it. I mean, I've already gone through the list, and I'm drooling at all the topics that I get to learn even at an even higher depth of knowledge, and then the authors that I get to speak to as a result of it. But we wanted to share that with you guys, and so we thought that we would do something live on YouTube so that you guys could follow along, and if you guys liked the book, you could actually go out and get it yourself. So it's kind of like a try before you buy. And so because of that, what we did was we decided to set up a little contest. And so when you sign up for these live stream events, you're going to end up one of you will end up getting a free book. One of you who puts comments into the comment section will get a free book. We'll randomly select one of the comments. And then anybody that's on our newsletter, Ideas on the Verge, and you can get all that information in the show notes below, will get access to a 25% discount code for the book of that week that we're talking about. And that offer is only available for 48 hours. So how that works is basically we end up sending you a coupon code right after this session, and you can go to the New Society website and pick it up for yourself if it's a fit for you. So with me today, I've got EJ from New Society Publishers. EJ is the communications director, and we've worked pretty close with her over the last little while. Wonderful lady, and I'll let you do a little introduction there, EJ, about New Society and this series, and yeah, anything else you want to talk about with regards to New Society.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rob. Hey, Chris. I'd also like to mention my coworker, Sarah Reeves, because she's really the brains behind all of this. But she's on her way home from the Frankfurt Book Fair, so I'm here instead of her. Thanks for all those kind words about New Society Publishers. One thing that is great about our company is we have really nice working relationships with our authors. And we do publish on a wide range of topics, from natural building to progressive parenting, leadership, alternative economics, basically any solution that you can think of to what ails this world right now. We'll have a book on the topic. So we're quite excited about this idea we came up with. We've been doing sort of written author interviews on our blog with an associated giveaway on Facebook. And we've been trying to figure out how we could turn this into something live. And so when Rob started talking about this idea, we're like, yes, okay. And Rob's got all the technical background and all that sort of thing. So between the two of us, I think it's going to be a really great series. And excited to start with Chris Magwood. So Chris is the editor of a building series we have called Sustainable Building Essentials Series. There's 11 books in the series. Chris has authored a few of them now. And they are all about natural building techniques, and they're very practical. They're really highly illustrated, and they cover everything you need to know about a whole range of natural building construction techniques. Fantastic tools. I went to try and grab a copy of your book, Chris, and of course it's the one that's not in stock because it's really popular. Nothing in the warehouse right now, and just here. We just keep a couple in our office. We have bigger warehouses elsewhere. So yeah, we've got, I said, 11 books in the series, and then we have another, I think 4 or 5 lined up to come out. So it just keeps, it's been going great guns. And yeah, we're quite pleased about it. A little bit about New Society Publishers. So we don't only publish on topics about sustainability, we run a sustainable business. So we're a registered B Corp. We only print on 100% post-consumer recycled paper, vegetable basting. As far as possible, we print only in Canada. We never print offshore. Sometimes we have to print across the border in the States, but that's rare. And we are a carbon neutral publishing company. There's not a lot of us. We were the first in North America. And we purchase our carbon credits from a local, it's called the Community Carbon Marketplace. And the bulk of our carbon credits go to a composting facility in Richmond, BC, which is just outside of Vancouver. So if you want to know more about us, check out our website. We have a store there as well, so you can buy print books and ebooks. And yeah, that's probably all you need to hear about me, because really we want to get to the main show today.
Great, thanks, EJ. That's great. You'll be seeing EJ a little bit later when we come to announce the winner of today's book. So make sure that you're putting comments up into the comment section, and we'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll randomly be selecting one of you guys. So without further ado, let's get into the interview. I actually remember the first time I came across Chris's name. I think it's one of his original books I own on straw bale design. And that really kind of got me thinking about alternative building and straw bale building. And then I've kind of reconnected with him over the last couple of years. partially through this book series, and also because I was teaching for them out in Ontario. Chris has been pioneering alternative and natural, and most importantly, sustainable building for over 20 years. He's probably one of the most humble guys I've ever met. And so you really have to ask him good questions to get the nuggets out there, because his humility is all throughout his book, but the guy is absolutely a genius when it comes to building. And so without further ado, Chris, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. But what I really want to get out of you today is what started all of this for you? What got you going down this path? Why did you go down an alternative path to building? And what's brought you to this point?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on and for that introduction. And I just want to say that I do really appreciate part of what keeps me going on this path is folks like New Society and folks like yourselves at Verge, where you clearly see that there are people who are committed and knowledgeable and really passionate about sustainability. That's once you set your foot in this world, it's a really great community to be part of. I guess what got me started was I was a freelance writer. I was looking to do less of the kind of crappy corporate jobs that I was having to take to make a living. And, my partner at the time and I, we were looking at, could we live mortgage free? Could we sort of, build ourselves a house that would allow us to, have that flexibility to be less sort of financially tied to the 9-to-5 job. And also we kind of had this notion that we could probably do better for the environment than what we were seeing in sort of current housing. And so that sparked a good couple years of research into, okay, well, we have this notion that that's what we want to do, but what does it mean and how would we do it? And, we researched cordwood buildings and log buildings and earthship buildings and, all kinds of different building systems, and found lots of interest in all of them, but also found things that made us really hesitant to maybe dive in and build a house that way. And then literally I was at a bookstore talking to the bookstore owner about this idea, and she whipped out this brand new book that had come out on straw bale building. And my initial reaction to it was, you've got to be kidding. And I decided to buy the book mostly to take home to my partner as a joke, very tongue in cheek, like, haha, we've looked at everything, now let's look at this straw bale thing. And honestly, it was the first time that even though we were skeptical to start with, the more we kind of learned about it, the better it seemed to get, rather than with most of the other things we'd researched. We'd gotten excited initially and then kind of dialed back as we found more about the actual building, some of the ins and outs of it. And so we ended up building the first permitted straw bale house in Ontario. And it was not, intended to be a step towards becoming a builder. But during the process of building it, I fell in love with building. I found that I was I was quick to learn how to read the plans. I was quick to see things in the plans and think, this doesn't look right to me. I wonder if this is a mistake. And then, call the architect and find out, yes, it was a mistake. And I just really, loved the building. And I really was inspired by the materials we were using to, I could tell that as we were doing things, that there were better ways that we could have done it. And so that was going through my head all the time, that sort of like, oh, if I were to do this again, I would do this or that, or change this or that. And so luckily, people heard about this first straw bale house, and they would just show up out in the middle of nowhere, rural Ontario, pretty much pre-internet. So I don't know how they were finding us, but and then start asking questions, which led to teaching some workshops, which led to helping some people build their houses. And within a couple of years, it had gone from something I just did once for myself into a full-time business. And I, like you said, you're still passionate about permaculture 10 years in. I feel the same way about building. Every time out, I learn something new. And every time I think I know something, I also discovered that there are people who know it better, and I just learn more and more all the time.
Awesome. That's quite the story, Chris. That's amazing. Buying a book for a joke, and then it ends up becoming, it's almost like the universe is laughing right back
That's
at
right.
you.
So that can be a warning to anybody who's thinking about, getting a book after this talk. It's it can change your life. It should come with that warning. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the reasons that I love this series that we're doing, because I've got a dozen books that have changed my life every single time, and it's amazing how books have the power to do that. So Chris, in the first part of this book, and let me just flash up an image of the book here for folks. If you guys haven't seen the book that we're actually talking about today, we're going to be talking about a book that, when did you write this book, Chris?
I think this came out last year.
Okay. And
Yeah.
This is your most recent book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. This is the book here, and I'm going to flash up two books actually, because I've kind of been a bit of a, I don't know if this is I'm going to make this word up, a magaphile. I've been reading a lot of Chris Magwood's books recently because we've been thinking about building. So I'm going to put up another one after this. We can quickly talk about it before I get to the question. But this is the book we're talking about today. This is the book that we're going to be giving away at some point towards the end of today's interview. The other book, which I really enjoyed, was, I'm just going to open it up here. See if I can get that. Is that coming across on your screen there, Chris?
It's still showing sustainable home design right now.
Okay. Let's change the share here. So sustainable home design is what we're talking about today. And I definitely got, this book is another really great book that if we have time, we can talk a little bit about it today. Honestly, it's one of my favorite books because, and we'll talk about why. One of the things that I really appreciate about your writing style, Chris, is how you systematize information. And it really kind of gets, I found myself in your writing actually, because I do this a lot for my clients. We design high performance properties. And when you're designing homes, which are hyper complex, I would argue, especially when you're doing things a little differently than the norm, it's similar to designing properties because you've got all these moving parts, you've got all this complexity. And so I really resonated with these two books, and you can find the links to these two books, by the way, in the show notes below, guys. There's bit.ly links there. It's all down there if you want to take a look for it. But I actually use both of these books now quite a lot in my own consulting practice. So it's actually helping me as an engineer help my clients to make better decisions. So it should be making better decisions to make better buildings, because that's really kind of what I get out of these two books. So in the beginning of the Essential Sustainable Building book, you talk about, you have kind of a warning for folks about getting into building. Can you talk a little bit about that warning and why you should not go into building a house or even designing and building a house on your own without doing enough diagnosis almost?
Yeah, well, I mean, partly that is one of the things that came out of my own experience was, kind of did dive in too quickly into too many different things with not enough research or support. And definitely, we paid the price for that in terms of the project taking longer, experiencing more hiccups, costing more, all of those things that can happen really did happen. And, really that should have put me off building for good, except that, I got very excited by those lessons I was learning, but they were lengthy and they were costly lessons. And I don't think that is, the best way for everybody to go about building. In fact, there's really no need to do that anymore. I mean, in 1996, there was one book on straw bale. None of these other books existed. The web was pretty new. You could look up these things and not find any information on them at the time. So, now there is so much more information, so many more examples, so many more people have been engaged in this that, there's really no need for any one individual to feel like, oh, I got to be the one to figure this out, trial and error. And I think literally I've seen people prepare well and come up with a house that they're really happy with, on schedule and on budget. And I've seen people mess it up and really put their life in a bit of a twist. When something the size of a house takes twice as long and costs twice as long, that can be pretty devastating. And so I really want to try to help people not end up in that position.
Right. Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I think that it's really easy to romanticize the building of a house without going into it with eyes wide open. So I really appreciated that warning for folks.
Yeah, and I think too that one of the biggest things that happens is the notion of there's all the planning side, which is huge, but on the construction side, I think there's a highly romanticized version of, I'm going to do this myself. And, I certainly had that notion, and I happened to be lucky enough that I was in a position that, the fact that it took 2 years instead of 1 year didn't, ruin my life. But for some people it can. And like the especially around the natural building world, there's a lot of things of like, oh, we'll hold a bale raising, we'll have a cob stomping party, and we'll build the house with volunteers and it'll be great. And again, I've seen people do that, and without realizing that the part that all those people can help you out with is like this much of the build, and you've got this much build to do, and all those wonderful friendly volunteers, like they're going to show up for a day or two, and it's a 1 year process. And so, that's not what's going to get your house built. You really have to think about, the other 98% of the time that you can't rely on those people.
Totally. I mean, just recently I was helping a couple through the design and build of a passive house here in Calgary. And the piece that I think, this is maybe a topic, I'm not sure if you want to take this topic on, but one of the components that Rob Roy has kind of hit on it a little bit, but the financing piece, is after you've got your design, there's almost a financing design that you need. And there's all these strange rules and regulations. I mean, I guess they're not that strange. I understand the banks are trying to mitigate risk. And if you've never built anything before, the risk is pretty high. But some of the rules and regulations around drawdowns, and which we don't need to get into on this conversation. Mostly, I just want to warn people while we're on the topic of warnings that when you're going to go and design your own house, it takes a lot of cash, and getting access to loans and debt might seem easy up front, but when you realize that there are all these rules about locking the house up before you can get a drawdown, and pouring a foundation, and that every time you draw down, you're paying it at a higher interest rate, a builder's interest rate, versus the interest rate that is listed on the front of the bank everywhere. So you're actually paying a higher fee in the process of building, so it speeds up the building process, and some of that stuff kind of flies in the face of some of Rob Roy's philosophies on mortgage free, where he talks about taking your time and scavenging materials and all that stuff. So certainly,
which I think is an entirely valid way of approaching it. I think as with everything in the book, that is one option and one path that you can go down. And if you understand that path and have thought it through, and that's what's going to work for you, then it can work. It's just, all through the book, I'm trying to warn people of just like those assumptions, like, oh, I'll just do it this way, or, oh, I want a straw bale house, or we should have a rainwater collection. Like, it's easy to just pick those parts out and sort of not really think through the implications of how the whole thing is going to come together.
Totally. Yeah. And so the other part of the book that I think is worth the entire cost of the book is your whole section on goal setting and all the questions that you ask. I mean, I think that if people really got a sense of the complexity, and I think that you start to get a pretty good sense of that in this book around, is it chapter 2, I think, or chapter 1 or 2, when you're talking about goals and goal setting, and all the hard questions that you're putting down on paper that people need to have answers for, to help reduce some of the back end complexity that occurs as a result of taking on a project like this.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about goals. And you've built a lot of buildings. Can you maybe give me a contrast between a building that has had a really good goal set on the front end versus one that hasn't, and the results of those two different approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, the difference is the building that has a really good firm set of goals going in is the one that does finish on time, on budget, and that the owner is very satisfied with. And usually that you can link that to the building having really strong goals, and on the other side, the buildings that take too long, cost too much, and don't meet the owner's expectations are often the ones where the goal set wasn't particularly strong. And I think when I do design with clients, I think people kind of get frustrated with me. I'm a little bit like the 2 or 3 year old at the table. Like every time somebody says something, I want a straw bale house, I just say, why? And my response to almost every statement that the client will make for a while is why. And if we could boil that down to the point where, like, okay, now we've nailed it. Like, you think you want a straw bale house. Why? Well, because, you want it to be really energy efficient. Well, a straw bale house is one kind of energy efficient house, but if that's your why, there's a whole bunch of other options that could work too. If the why is, I want something made out of local materials, again, straw bale could be the answer to that, but it might not be. There could be 4 other local materials that work. So the more you can sort of get down to, like, why is it that you want these things? Like, if you want to be net zero, why? Is it because you want to have a zero carbon footprint? Or is it because you want zero utility bills? And again, you would solve that differently as a designer for each of those things. But if somebody's just telling you, make me a net zero house, and you don't know the why, you could give them the house that has zero utility bills, but it still has a high carbon footprint. And that might be the opposite of what they wanted. So the goal setting is really an attempt to try to dig through so that you get to the essence of, like, what it is you're trying to achieve, and then you can go about figuring out how to do it. But it's until I feel like I'm on really solid ground around those essential, like, why questions, then I don't want to start attaching materials or systems or ways of building or contractors or budgets or anything to it until we really have that nailed down, because then that answers all your questions. Like, if you have a really good set of goals and now you've got 3 or 4 options you're choosing from, you go to those options and you say, this one satisfies 7 of my 8 goals perfectly, whereas this one only does 6 and this one only does 2. So clearly, the best option is this one. So although it might seem a complex thing to go through at first, it makes answering all the little decisions that are going to come up through the build over and over that much easier. So I think, it's just a great, solid base to be able to start a project from.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that people have to realize is that you're not putting an IKEA cabinet together when you build a house. There's not one set of instructions to follow. And at least with my clients, what I work really hard at is making them recognize that there are many different ways to achieve an outcome. And our job as designers is to help them to achieve that outcome optimally. And we cannot look for those different pathways if we're getting too specific too quickly.
Yeah.
Cool. So with that in mind, it kind of ties nicely into this next part. The next piece in the book that I really appreciated were all the tables. And so I wanted to flash some of those tables up. We've already had a couple of questions about different building systems and standards and things like that. So I'm gonna bring that first table up there, and I'll let you talk a little bit about some of the different building standards that you compare through these tables within your book. So let me just pull that up here.
Okay.
Just give me 2 seconds. It's just getting it here. Folks, while I'm just pulling that up there, if you're just signing in, just let us know where you're coming in from. And one thing you hope to get out of the talk today, we're going to be talking about, we're going to be opening it up to questions here really soon. We're going to go through a couple more things and then open it up to questions. So start thinking about your questions so that you can put those up in the chat window there. Just having to, I thought I had these all downloaded, but looks like I didn't. So we're just going to pull those up right now.
Yeah, I think, you know, if I'll just sort of talk about the goals more generally, they will also, those goals will help point out some of the conflicts that might be occurring in the design. Quite often, I mean, obviously, one of the goals is going to be to build for a set budget. That's, you know, I've never worked for a client where that hasn't been, you know, a central concern. And so, you know, part of that is sort of, you might have the goal of being off grid and building for very little money. And you might find that when you actually start working towards a design, those two goals come into conflict. And so, you know, we also try to get people to kind of rank the importance of some of those goals. So again, like as we come to decisions and there are things that are competing, you know, we know that, well, maybe you wanted to be fully off grid, but you also set this as a budget cap and your goal is to stay under that. And we actually can't do both things. And so, you know, here's where you need to decide, is it going to cost more? Like, are you going to, you know, try to elevate the budget, or are we going to have to, you know, go with a simple grid tie system, or plan for renewable energy later, but can't build it into the project now? So again, like having that really firm set of goals makes the conversation easier. So you're actually comparing things on a basis that's good for comparison versus just, you know, I want all of these things, and then you pursue it so far and then realize you can't have all of those things. Right.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So I've got the table up there. Why don't you give us a little tour of this table here and why you built it?
Sure. So across the top of the table, you know, through the book, I think there's sort of 10 or 11 kind of key criteria, key sort of goal areas that we cover. This isn't all of them, but it's a bunch of them. And so what I wanted to do was sort of look at, you know, for these goals. So if you're concerned about the ecosystem impacts, or, you know, the footprint that your building has on the planet in terms of, you know, deforestation, mining, you know, those kind of pollution type impacts. The next one is embodied carbon, energy efficiency, indoor environment quality, all of those criteria. People have built green building rating systems to try to be able to standardize these things, or to sort of show an owner that you've met a certain threshold. And so what I wanted to do is, on the left is a number of the different systems. So the first one here is the Living Building Challenge. And then I sort of go through and say, you know, does that rating system address ecosystem impacts and embodied carbon and energy efficiency and all those different categories? And if so, like, there's a yes, no. And then if it does, it sort of tells you in very short detail how it goes about doing that, like how it, so, you know, for example, the Living Building Challenge, if you're looking to use its rating for energy efficiency, the building has to be net positive energy. So you have to make 105% of your energy needs on site through renewables. That's their bottom line. So, you know, if that appeals to you, if your goal overlaps with their goal, then you could sort of like look at their program or subscribe to their program and actually, you know that's going to help you get to that goal, and so on. So each of the systems, it sort of looks at LEED for homes is the next one, and I kind of go through all the main programs. And what I try to do with my clients is, you know, if their goal set aligns really well with one particular rating system, then maybe we'll actually use that rating system for the whole project. Or, if they like parts of how, their goal set crosses over with a one rating system here, but they like how it crosses over better with another one there, then we can kind of go to all those different rating systems and use their frameworks. And I think the thing to remember is that a lot of people have put a lot of thought and time and energy into figuring this stuff out for you. And you might not buy their whole program. You might not want to follow the entire Living Building Challenge, but you might love their standards for indoor environment quality and red list chemical avoidance and those sorts of things. So rather than you having to invent what indoor environment quality means for you, you can just go to the Living Building Challenge and meet their standard and feel like, okay, I've done as good a job as I can do on making sure my building has a healthy indoor environment.
Totally. And so you go through the Living Building Challenge, you compare it to LEED for homes, USA and Canada, National Green Building Standard, Active House. I've never even heard of that one. That's something I want to look into. Passive House, which a few people have mentioned already in the show notes. And there's a few others as well, actually. I've got let me just pull it up here. That you go through. I'm curious, you've also got R2000, which is a program that's been around for quite a while, Energy Star, well building, and the standard of building biology testing, which I've also just recently learned about. And that's a whole other ball of wax right there. But I'm curious, out of all these standards, do you, again, I mean, it's driven by your client's goals, but selfishly, are there specific standards in here that you really appreciate, that you use a lot in your buildings?
We certainly lean on the Living Building Challenge a lot, although we haven't done any certified living buildings. I definitely, their overall sort of goal set and the aim of that program is pretty close to my own heart and pretty close to how I want to build. We also use Passive House a lot. Again, we don't necessarily do a lot of certified passive houses, but we definitely use the Passive House design software and their sort of targets for energy efficiency a lot. The building biology standards, we take the indoor environment quality of our buildings really seriously. And so that's the standard that kind of holds the highest rating levels as far as I'm concerned for the quality of the indoor environment. So I think, we do pick and choose from all of them, but I think overall the Living Building Challenge is a pretty phenomenal program. I might have quibbles with small details within it, but overall what they're attempting to do is pretty closely in line with what I'm attempting to do.
Right. Yeah. Let's quickly go through this other table, which I found really insightful in the book, and kind of what the driver for this table was for you, and then I want to round out with some of your insights on some of the work that you're doing in your current master's right now. Some of the stuff we talked about earlier, but let's just quickly go through this table here.
Okay. Yeah, this table is definitely at the sort of core of the book and of our sort of design practice at Endeavour. And what it is sort of a distillation of 20 years worth of us trying to figure out how to, work with clients to get the information we need from them to do a good design for them. And through all the clients we've worked with, this has kind of emerged. So again, those criterion that go down the left, those are sort of the 10 or 11 categories that we think, really, if somebody wants to build a sort of green building or a sustainable building, we think that this is what you're talking about, or the various components of what you might be talking about. And what we're trying to do is get a sense, what does I want to build a sustainable house mean to this particular client? For some people, that just means energy efficiency, though. So they might take that third criteria there and really pay attention to it. And they might not care at all about the embodied carbon footprint. They might not care at all about the indoor environment quality. They might not care how much waste they're making. That's their focus. We might get somebody who's all about low ecosystem impacts and doesn't really care about other things. or, more typically you get people who sort of have a mix of all of those things. So then we, beside each criterion, we sort of have 4 levels. And the idea with the levels is they're not judgmental. They're not sort of better or worse. They're just what would this client might be aiming for. So, under, say, embodied carbon, if you choose 1, you're basically telling me as a designer, don't worry about the embodied carbon. That's not a priority here at all. A 2 would be, wherever you can, make a better choice, do it, but don't make it a priority. And then as we get to 3, and then especially 4, 4 is telling me, okay, like this building has to be 0 carbon or even carbon positive. And that's, that sort of then elevates it into one of the key goals of the project. So we kind of try to get our clients to work through this particular matrix and, give us a circle or a tick mark, in each of the, for each of the criteria on where they fall between 1 and 4. And then that's kind of what we start to build the design on. We sort of look at those things, and almost always we can find a set of materials and systems that match that particular profile. But knowing that profile means we're not just throwing out system and material options sort of willy-nilly. It's like, okay, no, we know that what we're saying actually does what the person is after here.
Yeah, I really loved this, and I'm going to use this in my consulting work for sure, because it really it simplifies it down. It takes some of the jargon out of it, and it makes it approachable. We're getting close to I know you've got a hard deadline, and I want to give folks time to ask you questions. So just to round out this table, just for folks, there's categories on energy efficiency, indoor air quality, waste, and resilience. And obviously the book has got way more, and we literally could talk about this book for 3 hours. I want to just capture some of the insights that you and I were talking about on the phone the other day, specifically around your master's program. And while we're looking at this chart, and I'll pull it down in a second, the embodied carbon and some of the insights you've had around carbon, the embedded carbon in products, and how that correlates to the overall building. Yeah,
this has really become my focus of late, and it came out during when I was writing the Making Better Buildings book, where I was looking at all the different materials that are out there, and again trying to give them, basically put each material on that same criteria matrix, so that people would be able to see, if I choose material A, this is where it falls in terms of its environmental impact and its costs, its ease of use, all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that I found when I was doing that was it had just come out in England called the Inventory of Carbon and Energy, and it gave an embodied carbon figure for all of these materials, and I didn't even really know what that was. And so I started to look at it, and I was like, oh, that's how much carbon is emitted in sort of harvesting, manufacturing, and transporting a building material. And I started to insert the numbers for the materials in that book. And as I looked at them, I thought, wow, there's some huge variation in these numbers. It would be interesting to take one of my buildings and add all this up and see what the carbon footprint of a building actually is. And the results were kind of shocking. Things that I thought, oh, I'm doing something really good for the environment. And then I look and I go, oh, in terms of its contribution to climate change, that was terrible. That was, it was a terrible thing to be doing, even though, it did meet a bunch of the other things that I thought of as important environmental criteria. But, I'm pretty much, I think climate change is what we should all be focusing on sort of first and foremost. And so, I started just adding up, making model buildings basically, and finding what's the best thing I could do for climate change if I'm making a new building or doing a renovation. And pretty quickly I learned, oh, there's materials on these charts that have negative numbers that and then to me I was thinking, well, what does a negative number mean? And what it means is there's more carbon stored in the material than was emitted in making the material. And those are basically the plant-based materials. So whether it's straw or hemp or wood or cork or recycled paper, so insulations like cellulose, all of those materials are about, in the range of 50% carbon by weight. Plants, which are the original and still the best carbon capture and storage devices, we know about, pull all this CO2 out of the atmosphere when they're growing. And, if the plant falls over, dies, and decomposes, all that CO2 goes back into the atmosphere. But if we take that material and lock it up in a building, that carbon stays in the building. And so, my realization was some of the buildings that I was making were actually carbon sinks rather than carbon emitters. And that seemed like a pretty big revelation that, a building can be an actual climate change solution rather than a climate change problem. And so, I started a master's program at Trent University to kind of expand on that research, to build more of these models, and to kind of, look at what does it mean if buildings can actually become carbon capture and storage devices rather than like right now, the construction of buildings is about 15-20% of all human caused emissions is making building materials. And so that's a pretty big slice of the global pie. And, if you build a carbon sequestering building, you turn that around. And I'm excited about the possibility that the whole building industry could take that seriously and go from being one of the leading causes of climate change to actually being, the sixth, carbon sink on the planet. We build a lot of buildings, and if we sort of flipped our notion of them and made them carbon storage devices, that has potentially huge ramifications on the large scale, but certainly for individual clients, if you are trying to build a sustainable building and climate change is on your mind, the fact that you yourself can go out and make a building that reverses climate change in, what your contribution is small, but still it's part of an effort that that's potentially quite radical and transformational.
Yeah, it all adds up. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Well, we got 15 minutes left with Chris before he has to give another presentation tonight. So I want to just make sure that you guys are aware that I just put a link up in the chat. It's also in the show notes. If you want to be emailed with the 25% off coupon for Chris's book, Essential Sustainable Building, I highly recommend it. Make sure you're on that newsletter. We'll be sending out that newsletter shortly after this live stream. And you've got 48 hours to purchase that book with the 25% off coupon. So don't procrastinate. So let's open it up to a few questions. I had a couple of really good questions here. I'm just going to go back and find it here about building codes. So the question from Seek to Find was, what about meeting building codes and how do you incorporate those? And so unfortunately, Seek to Find, we only had an hour with Chris, but Chris has a whole section on building codes that I really wanted to talk about tonight. Especially there's one section in the book which is basically I think it's something like don't spite the building codes. Like they're not there to make our life miserable, they're there to protect us. Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about building codes and some of the tables that you built in there as well? Sure, to help people to navigate this complex part of building?
Yeah, I mean, and it's again, it is one of the parts of this that you would want to take very seriously. I know I'm much more familiar with Canadian building codes than American codes, so that's the perspective that I'll kind of talk from. But there are similar provisions in both. But here in Canada, we have something called an objective-based code, and so there are kind of like two pathways for compliance in Canada. One is the prescriptive pathway, so that's the code that you think about when you think about the code that says like do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, and you're code compliant. And then there's an objective pathway where you can propose alternative solutions, and each line of code in the building code has a sort of like underlying objective and function statement that says like, why is this in the code in the first place? And so when you're dealing with materials or systems that are outside the code, it's kind of what you have to do is sort of make the case that what you're proposing at least matches the minimum standards that the prescriptive solution would have. And so you write an alternative solutions package. There's a pretty good selection of them that you can find online. People share them. We share ours at Endeavour. The Ontario Natural Building Coalition has a place where you can share those. But basically you say, for example, a straw bale wall, if that's what you're trying to do, if the underlying code says, a residential wall needs a 30-minute, fire rating, then we find all the test documentations that shows that straw bale walls have at least a 30-minute fire rating, and we compile all of those and we submit that. If somebody's worried about the R value, then you find the tests and the studies and the documents that back that up, and you basically sort of like have to build a case that you take to the building department. And things have changed a lot since that code came out in around 2006 is when that objective code came into effect. And by and large, I mean, we haven't really had a serious issue with the building department in like 7 or 8 years now. I mean, they've really started to understand how these work. They've started to understand that it's important that things are changing and that this is the way that changes happen. And as long as you're well documented, we really haven't run into many roadblocks. But again, it's one of those things, and it's one of the things in my my criteria matrix is how building code compliant do you want to be? If you have one part of your building that's an alternative compliance, that's not such a big deal. You might want to be 100% code compliant, or you might be willing to be completely, like almost every part of the building comes from the alternative compliance thing. And again, that knowing where you want to fall on that helps direct me as a builder. If you're trying to make a carbon sequestering, non-toxic, energy efficient house, you might be thinking you're going to build with straw bale, but if you want to be 100% code compliant, you can build with stud framing, dense packed cellulose insulation, and wood fiberboard sheathing, and you'll have hit the same carbon target, you'll have hit the same energy efficiency target, and you'll be code compliant. So it's just another one of the factors that you throw in. You decide how code compliant do I want to be, how much work do I want to put into trying to get this building through the codes. If your threshold for that is low, then stay away from those options that force you into alternative compliance. And if you really want to, do what you want to do and you're going to get it through the code one way or another, then that is it. You could do that too.
Awesome. Yeah, I really like that section. So Deborah from Valley View Farm asks, and I've had this actually, when we sent this email out to our list, a couple of people wrote back and asked this exact same question. What about renovations, and where have you used these same systems for doing deep energy retrofits or home renovations on older homes?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like when we do plan a renovation with a client, we use the same criteria matrix. And depending on the answers that come out of that, we might use the exact same set of materials and systems as we would on a new build, or it might be quite different. Obviously there are some materials that just don't lend themselves easily to a retrofit. If you're retrofitting an old double wall brick house in Toronto, you're probably not going to try to stuff straw bales in it, just from a practical point of view. But again, that's why I don't want somebody to go straight to, I want to build with straw. I want them to, even if it's a renovation, I want them to say, I want to be carbon neutral, energy efficient, all of these things. And then we can go, oh, well, we could dense pack that wall with, cellulose insulation, and that will be non-toxic and carbon sequestering and, using a recycled material with low waste and, meet all of these goals and fit within the sort of parameters of your project. So, there's always more than one way to meet those goals. And as long as you know what the goal is, then even in a retrofit situation, there's definitely a way to, meet whatever sort of high or low threshold of each of those goals that you want to meet.
Right. Okay. Seek to Find asks, can you find doors and windows that fit the greater thickness of alternative houses? And I'm going to just say you absolutely can, but I'd love to get your take, Chris, on the types of windows and doors that you typically are specifying in your homes.
Right. Yeah. So, basically every time I answer a question, I'm going to say the same thing. Like, it goes back to our goals matrix. So
right.
If, say, energy efficiency is at the top of your list, then, going down to Habitat and grabbing the old used cheap windows that, the cheapest thing you can find isn't going to get you to the highest level of energy efficiency. So you have to know your targets there. You also want to look at, with things like used windows, does it have lead paint on it? Like, if indoor environment quality is high on your list, you probably don't want to bring a bunch of old doors and windows that are covered in lead paint in, or, there's all kinds of things to think about. In terms of the width, the wall might be wide, but the door or window is the same unit that would go in any building. So there's nothing special about the actual door or window. What's different is how it gets framed into the wall, and there's no standard. Sometimes you might make a frame as wide as the whole wall, in which case your opening is kind of square and deep. Some people want to make angled returns going into that opening. Some people want to make a curve into that opening. They could be set to the inside, set to the outside, set in the middle. Like, there's a bunch of choices you can make, but essentially the units, the door and window units themselves are no different for any type of wall system.
So Chris, I got one more question, and then we'll ask you to round it all out with any closing thoughts. So Northbound Bloom asks, how does essential sustainable home design and making better buildings compare? Do they support each other, cover different topics, and is one a precedent to the other?
The essential sustainable home design book is really all about figuring out how to make those decisions. Like, it's based around that criteria matrix, and then has all the support. So, on the criteria matrix, it has the section on the code compliance, but then there's a whole chapter in the book that kind of talks you through what it means to be code compliant and how you be code compliant. There's sections on budget and cost and, all of those other things. And at the end of it, there's like a sort of, an overview of different materials and systems and how they align with those various criteria. Making better buildings is just about materials and systems. And so it doesn't have the whole home design part or the context for it. So I would say, if you're thinking about building, the essential sustainable home design is the place to start. And then if you want to geek out and get kind of deeper into, the whole range of materials and how to fine tune your design using the right materials, that's what Making Better Buildings is about. It's just materials and systems. It doesn't sort of give all the sort of design context that the essential sustainable home design does.
Yeah, for me, I read Making Better Buildings kind of by section based on what I was interested in, because the book is laid out in a really systematic way. So every chapter is written in a very, or every section is written in a very similar way. And so it gives you a very, as unbiased as you can possibly be, way of comparing different building options from the foundation right to the roof, as well as some of the systems at the back, versus the, as Chris said, the essential sustainable building design is really process oriented with some of the building stuff in the back. But for me anyways, I read the essential sustainable building book from cover to cover. And I'll probably read it from cover to cover again. And I'm going to be using both help me in my design philosophy in different ways. So when a client comes and asks me about a specific building material, I go to Making Better Buildings. When I need to help kind of drill down into the goals of a specific project, that's where this new book is going to be really helpful. So hopefully that answers your question, Northbound Bloom. So Chris, do you want to close out with any closing remarks? And then EJ and I are going to take over. I know you got to run to another talk tonight, and we'll be announcing the book winner very shortly here, and just making sure you guys have all the details on how to get on the Ideas on the Verge email list and why you might want to be on there. Any closing thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I think, we're at a really interesting point in the building industry right now. I have noticed such a radical change, not just sort of on the fringes where I feel, I've been operating for a long time, but that the whole building industry is kind of giving its head a bit of a shake right now and realizing that, in the majority of those criteria we've been talking about today, they've been failing and they can't continue to fail anymore. And so there's a pretty large reimagining going on, and it's a super exciting time to be interested in this. Like if you are at the point where you're thinking about a major building project or a renovation or something like that, it's an amazing time to be doing it. The range of options you have to choose from, the range of resources out there, the range of people and support that's out there makes it so much more viable to be doing this now than ever before. And it's super exciting. Like if you want to set yourself a pretty amazing challenge that has the potential to have like this really incredible result, that you live in this amazing, beautiful, comfortable, energy efficient, affordable building, it's a great time to be diving into that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've really picked up from you, Chris, in our interactions is that, and you guys have a similar message, is like, let's make this better and more positive and move toward something that's better versus move towards this out of fear or negativity. And that's really the sense that I get from your books and from talking to you. And I really appreciate that sentiment.
Okay, well, thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks to everybody who tuned in. I appreciate the chance to talk to everybody. Yeah, thanks, Chris. All right, EJ, if you want to unmute yourself, we can go through the contest while EJ is doing that. I just want to mention, if you're not on our newsletter already, I've put the link in the show notes, as well as I'll put it into the chat window here again just in a few seconds. If you are on the Ideas newsletter, we're going to give you reminders and let you know about upcoming authors. The next author we're interviewing has, I think, 4 decades of experience in raising meat rabbits. And I've recently started doing that with my kids. I'm really excited about it. I think this represents an incredibly interesting niche within the urban and rural raising of sustainable meat products. But there's also all sorts of other benefits of raising rabbits as well. So that'll be on the next one in 2 weeks from now. If you're on the newsletter list, we'll give you a heads up as to when that's coming and when to sign in. You're also going to get the 25% coupon for 48 hours, Friday at midnight this week, for the Essential Sustainable Building series. So if you're interested in this book, which I highly recommend, you're going to want to be on that newsletter list to get that discount code. So I'll put that link up in the comments right now. EJ, did you want to let me know who we've selected randomly for the book giveaway this evening? And if there are any other details about that program, you can mention them right now.
Yep, for sure. I did my best to be random, and I've picked Seek to Find for the free book. Rob, we'll need Seek to Find if you can send us your mailing address, and we will get that in the mail to you. I just wanted to chime in there about rabbits. My lovely son rescued a bunch of baby rabbits and sent most of them to a rabbit rescue place and brought 2 home. And then about 2 months later, moved out to a pet unfriendly place. So I keep threatening him that I will be using my Raising Rabbits books, but I don't think he's going to go for it. So awesome. Seek to Find, you've won the free copy of Chris's book. And Rob, can you just give the details of where to email the mailing address?
Absolutely. So Seek to Find, if you just want to send us an email to info@vergepermaculture.ca with your address and your name, and we will get that book to you in the mail. The way the book contest is going to work is that if you're in Canada or the United States, and correct me if I'm wrong, EJ, but you guys will ship it to them. But if it's overseas, then you have a choice to either get the e-copy delivered to your inbox, or I believe as New Society the winner can pay the shipping if they want the hard copy if they're overseas. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The reason we don't usually ship to overseas is we've had so many shipments go missing. So
Right.
yeah,
Totally.
but if people are willing to try, you also, if it's going overseas, you have to provide a telephone number.
Right. And I've just got a question here, EJ, from Revolve Farms. Is the print copy and the ebook 25% off?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, at Revolve Farms, I'm kind of like you. I kind of like to have both the e-copy and the hard copy, because one's searchable. And then I'm still that guy that loves tangible stuff. So I like to have the physical copy so that I can write on it. And I mean, if you look at my my book right here for Chris, I mean, it's just it's pretty marked up already, and I'm having lots of insights from it. Great, guys. Well, I hope you got some great insights and nuggets out of the conversation tonight. If you can do me a favor and you got value, please hit the like button down below. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you hit it twice, you'll get notified when we go live. We're going to be going live a heck of a lot more over the next 12 months. There's going to be some incredible shows with some incredible authors, as well as other content that we're working on right now. If you found this video useful, one more thing you can do to help the channel and help spread the word about this incredible information is you can share it on your own social media feeds. Thanks, guys. We'll be in touch real soon, and look forward to your comments and seeing you on our live shows in the future. Thanks, EJ.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks to Chris too. That was a wonderful start.
Yeah, great.